Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and we've got less than a month until the election.
Donald Trump's tariffs are essentially the same as a tax, a national sales tax that will cost every one of you thousands of dollars a year. And just this week, his running mate, J.D. Vance, that guy from Ohio, J.D. Vance said they do not support $500 million federal investment to upgrade our auto plants. You cannot tell me you care about the people of Michigan if you're going to undermine the core of our economy in Michigan. So it's pretty simple. When you have a chance to save hundreds of good-paying Michigan auto jobs and create more, you take it. Instead, the Trump-Vance ticket is giving the middle finger to workers here in Michigan.
Yes, that was Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer speaking at a Kamala Harris event in Flint last weekend. She took on a weirdo tech bro boy wonder Ohio MAGA Senator J.D. Vance, who said that he's against investments in helping ensure EV cars are developed and made here in the state of Michigan. Now, Vance would rather the Chinese continue to make strides in that industry, while America continues to fall behind. Just last week, Vance refused to answer whether or not he agreed with a $550 million investment to help GM convert its Lansing plant from the 20th century combustible engine days to make it more compatible to manufacture EV cars. Now, GM says this will help the plant keep 650 jobs while creating a handful of other jobs. Hold on. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, but Pat, I've heard you criticize the race to the bottom fight that's happening between states where they each offer so much in tax breaks and incentives for corporations, and then it ends up hurting all the workers in the end. I've even heard you say, Pat, that you would have voted against the Goshen plan in Big Rapids. Okay. All right. Fair point. Look, all true. And I would have taken the stance against the Goshen plant like some other state Senate Democrats took, not because I believed in all the anti-Asian fear-mongering many right-wingers were pushing and many of them believed in, but because I would have wanted assurances that the workers would indeed receive living wages and benefits. I mean, it's our tax dollars being used. Let's make sure that some of it goes to the workers, right? And yes, I'm not a big fan of corporate welfare, as you heard me talk about with Bridge Magazine's Paula Gardner a few months ago, who wrote an awesome piece on how the money that we've been throwing at manufacturing over the years isn't exactly yielding all of the promises that supporters of that corporate welfare said would happen. And that's why I backed the bills that state Senate Democrats passed, which not only cut back on corporate tax incentives, but also ensured that there would be increased spending on infrastructure upgrades and additional housing, with extra spending in the areas where these plants were either being built or refurbished. I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense than just throwing money at corporations and hoping that they do the right thing. So let's hope that bill does pass the state house after the election. But here's the thing, everyone. I can also understand and see that there are some nuances with all this, and that we just can't sit back and do absolutely nothing while China continues to make gains in the EV car market. The world is headed in that direction, and sticking to gas-powered cars is the worst thing that we could be doing both economically and environmentally. But back to J.D. Vance. He made an appearance in Detroit this week, and that's where he finally formulated a response to that question. And he said that the $500 million is just table scraps of what is needed to build EV cars here. And he said that he and his dear leader would cancel the money. Vance said, and I quote, "We certainly want to invest in Michigan auto workers as much as possible. What we've said is that Kamala Harris is offering table scraps. $500 million when you have an EV mandate that's going to cost 117,000 auto worker jobs. I think the Michigan auto workers deserve more than the table scraps of Kamala Harris's Green New Deal." Okay, now here's the thing with that whole quote. Did you notice that Vance didn't give any of their own plans on what they do to invest in this ever-changing, cleaner economy? They have absolutely zero plan. Nothing. Then they try to scare people by saying that Harris has an EV mandate, but that's not true. There is no mandate, and it's impossible to have a mandate when we don't have the cars or the infrastructure yet to set some kind of mandate. And by the way, the whole thing about costing 117,000 auto worker jobs, good made up number there, JV. But you see, this is where the industry is headed. This is where Michigan is headed. And not just in terms of auto manufacturing, but in terms of the clean energy bills that Governor Whitmer signed into law last year. A law passed by the Democratic legislature that, while not perfect at all, sets a carbon-free energy production goal by 2040 and diversifies our energy grid and our state's economy. Dear Leader Trump, though, says, no. You see, China already dominates the EV market. Why would we want to try to compete? Why would we want to try to compete? Because this is the good old US of A, you nitwit. We do things here and we lead, to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, not because things are easy, but because they are hard. I mean, what's Dear Leader's solution at all? Doubling down on making gas-powered cars at a time when the world's economy sees the drastic and negative impact our reliance on fossil fuels is causing our environment? Hell, we're witnessing the second severe hurricane slam into Florida in the last 2 weeks. Our winters up here are disappearing. And yet, Dear Leader says, no, let's just stick doing what we're doing. I mean, the entire auto industry is moving towards EV cars, and he wants the United States to be stuck in the 1950s? Well, okay, all right, yeah, you're right. The entire MAGA and Christian nationalist movement wants us to remain stuck in the 1950s, all of whom, by the way, are supporting Dear Leader Trump and his Project 2025. But Michigan Advance's Michi economist and good friend of the show, Rick Hagelin, wrote another insightful piece about the changing auto industry, but he shared this disturbing bit of info, so let me read it for you, okay? And this is what he wrote. Close to half of Michigan voters agree with Dear Leader Trump, according to a poll released by the Detroit Regional Chamber. The statewide poll conducted by the Glenn Gariff Group found that 44.9% of voters do not believe that Michigan should compete to be the leader of EV manufacturing, compared to 50.3% who said it should. Only 24.7% of strong Republicans, that's in quotations, believe it's important to lead in EV manufacturing. At some point, all Michiganders will face the economic reality that if these new automotive jobs are not welcome here in Michigan now, the future automotive industry will quickly be welcomed somewhere else. Glenn Gariff Group President Richard Zuba said, Yes, they will. We can either accept this change, everyone, and adapt to the changes, which Whitmer and the Democrats are trying to do, or we can lose all the jobs, infrastructure, and people willing to stay here to do the work. The UAW, you see, the UAW gets that, which is why Sean Fain and the union is backing Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Well, also because they are strong union supporters and will push to pass the PRO Act, which will help unions in organizing and collective bargaining, so that's got something to do with it too. But still, Harris and Walz are on the union side. Meanwhile, Trump and J.D. Vance are, of course, anti-union scabs and will always side with management, as I have explained here many times. And they get that, which is why they can only scare people in thinking that the auto industry will get destroyed if we move to EV cars in the future. Of course, as always with Trump and MAGA, the reverse is always true, because if we do nothing, then the auto industry will indeed dry up here in Michigan. And it is interesting, though. I mean, really interesting that Trump isn't saying much about Tesla nowadays, since he's got Elon's backing. But Trump and the Republicans understand how they need union support here, and it's why they have to continue to lie to get some of that support. The Detroit News' Craig Mauger was at J.D. Vance's Detroit stop this week, and he wrote, and I'm quoting here, "There were more than a dozen people in the crowd at Vance's Detroit event wearing Auto Workers for Trump t-shirts. However, two of the individuals, Carl Leonard of Chesterfield Township and Terry Flannery of Richmond, told the Detroit News they were not auto workers, but supporters of Trump who had been given the t-shirts by Brian Panbecker, who founded the group Auto Workers for Trump." Stunning, really stunning to learn that yet again, there were people there in the crowd acting like they were auto workers or UAW workers when they were not. Just recall that when Dear Leader visited Michigan during the UAW strike last year, he visited a non-union shop with people claiming to be union workers in the crowd when they weren't. I mean, that was just about 6 months ago. Oh, and Newsweek followed up on this Auto Workers for Trump group, saying Auto Workers for Trump 2024 began as a counter-movement to the UAW union's endorsement of Democratic presidential candidate and Vice President Kamala Harris, but the group's support of the former president stretches back to just before the 2016 election. See, it's always based on a line. The sad part is, though, that there's a sizable portion of union workers who will still back this guy, even though he has spent his entire life destroying unions, and that includes when he was in the White House. And the thing is, he'd have nothing to do with working class Americans if they showed up on his Mar-a-Lago doorstep. They are not the kinds of people he wants to mingle with. He's never thought about the people at all. And that leads me back to J.D. Vance's speech here in Detroit, because he had to answer this question from the Detroit Free Press's Clara Hendrickson on whether he could guarantee that there would be no rioting if they lose the election. And just listen to his response. It's beautiful.
We're in the city of Detroit today, where we learned in a recent Jack Smith filing that a Trump campaign aide in 2020 allegedly urged supporters to riot at the ballot counting center. So I want to make sure that the senator can hear my question, which is, would you discourage the campaign from engaging in that behavior and from Trump supporters and engaging in any chaotic scene?
So let me answer that question a few different ways. So first of all, of course we discourage rioting. We do not riot. Nobody in this room and nobody in this movement is going to riot.
I love the crowd. Boo! Boo! Don't make us answer questions that are truthful and make us look like we're violent, weird people. Boo! Boo! My God. And you guys don't riot, JV? Really, JV? Really? I mean, what was January 6th all about then? Now, Clara Hendrickson was talking about, in her question, Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's recent court filing in his investigation and indictment into Dear Leader's role in the January 6th riot or insurrection. And in the filing, a Trump campaign operative encouraged the staffer to get their supporters to riot by saying, quote unquote, "Make them riot," as many of his rabid supporters protested outside the TFC Center in Detroit, where absentee ballots were being counted the day after the 2020 election. You remember that? I mean, this is where Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Jenna Ellis and others claim that there was some kind of widespread fraud when none occurred. But they did try to block the votes of hundreds and thousands of Detroiters from being counted. Of course, many voters in Detroit are black, so let's just call it what it is. Trump tried to block the votes of black Detroiters from being counted. Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters told the Detroit News that Detroiters should be outraged that Trump attempted to erase their votes. And Craig Mauger of the Detroit News tweeted out his receipts reminding us how Trump tried to block the votes from being counted in Detroit back in 2020. He had headlines here: Trump campaign worker encouraged rioting at the TCF Center where Detroit absentee ballots were counted. Trump urged Wayne County canvassers not to certify. Trump said Detroit was totally corrupt. I don't forget that. And remember The two Republican Wayne County canvassers tried to delay the certification, but as CNN reported at the time in 2020, the GOP officials from the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, Monica Palmer and William Hartman, did try to later rescind their votes to certify the results, but it was too late. The Michigan State Canvassing Board later certified the results as well, despite public pressure from Trump and other Republicans. That's right. There were issues with the State Canvassing Board in certifying the results too. Don't forget that. You see, sowing distrust in our elections is all MAGA has. They don't have policy ideas that people find popular. No. This is all they have, is sowing distrust and also wacky conspiracies. And it's detailed by a recent AP poll on elections. Let me read this portion to you, if you don't mind, real quick. About 2/3 of Republicans trust Trump's campaign at least a moderate amount to provide accurate information about the results of the 2024 election, while only about half say the same about the official certifications of results, the survey found. By contrast, about 9 in 10 Democrats trust the government certification, at least a moderate amount, and an overwhelming majority, 82%, also have had at least a moderate amount of trust in Harris and her campaign. So you see there, no matter what, 2/3 of MAGA voters will believe whatever he says after the election is over. It's why they swallowed up the whole lie that after Hurricane Helene ravaged parts of North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida, that's why they believed the lie that FEMA couldn't do its job because most of its money was being directed towards housing illegal immigrants. The money given to those hit hard and having their lives upended by natural disasters such as hurricanes come out of the Disaster Relief Fund appropriated by Congress each and every year. And due to the severity of our weather disasters, again, due to climate change, we're having to spend more and more money. That's why Congress must come back here and pass more disaster relief money, which FEMA oversees. It's not because of immigrants. It's because we are dealing with massive storms to the likes that we haven't experienced before. Now, Trump said in Michigan last week, they stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from the bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants that they want to have vote for them this season. Okay, first, illegal immigrants cannot vote, you nitwit. Second, FEMA does have a separate fund that provides shelter for migrants because I don't think we just want to have them living out in the streets, do we? But this is a separate fund and is completely unrelated to the Disaster Relief Fund. Oh, and House Speaker MAGA Christian nationalist nutjob Mike Johnson still refuses to bring Congress back to provide more money for FEMA right now. And by the way, isn't it rich? Really, isn't it rich? These are the same clowns who year after year after year claim that there's no such thing as climate change. Let's just drill, baby, drill. Look, it's snowing. How can there be climate change when it's still snowing, you libtards? These are the same people who make those ridiculous claims. But now, as these storms become more powerful and prevalent, they're going to now turn around and blame Democrats for not doing enough. That is how the Republican playbook has always been throughout my entire life, way before MAGA. There's nothing you can say or do to change the cult's mind. Here, listen to this. Here's Adam Meckler from Midas Touch interviewing a supporter of Dear Leader Trump, okay? Now, she was all decked out in Trump gear at some rally. I'm not sure where it took place. And he asks her a simple question and got a scary yet sad response. Listen.
To vote for Kamala Harris or Putin? Who do you choose?
Putin.
Really? Why?
Absolutely. He's for his people. He is for his people.
You don't think Kamala is?
Oh, hell no.
Interesting. So you think the country would be better off under a rule like a Kim Jong-un or somebody or Vladimir Putin?
Hey, I love Russia.
You do? Why?
Yeah, it's beautiful. The people are wonderful.
Man, would Ronald Reagan roll in his grave right now. But what am I supposed to do with this? How does one talk to such people? Trust me, I know. These are the same people who plan their days around Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck. They would schedule their days around those guys because they had to listen to them. I mean, these are the same people who've been programmed to distrust those of us who want to tax rich people a little bit more because we like to give a little equal opportunity to others. These are the same people who listen religiously to those telling them that George W. Bush was the best president ever, that the Iraq War would rock, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that corporate tax breaks and deregulation of the banking industry would rock for everyone else, that ripping away money from public schools and the private schools would be a boon to our society, that privatizing the public sector would fix everything, that hiring so-called business-savvy, successful people would fix government as those same people imploded the housing market. And these are the same people who listen religiously to those telling them how a con man who professed to know everything told us to inject ourselves with bleach during a pandemic. And yet, despite being lied to over and over again and being grifted and being played, they keep going back for more. Some can find their way out of that brain suction machine, but it can only really be, in my opinion, a self-journey. I'm not so sure that anyone they deem on the outside or part of the deep state or part of the DEI movement can help. I mean, all that we can do right now is outnumber them and hope that by defeating dear leader of MAGA, perhaps some will find their way out eventually on their own. But for the times we're currently living in, everyone, outnumbering and reaching as many people as possible is the best way to defeat those trying to do the un-American action of turning us into an extreme and debilitating Christian nationalist society. And a recent Detroit News WDIV poll released this week kind of gave me a little bit of hope here in Michigan. The survey of 600 likely Michigan voters conducted in early October found Kamala Harris to have a 2.6 percentage point lead over Republican former President Donald Trump. Among the participants, 46.8% said they would vote for Harris, 44.2% said they would pick Trump, 8.3% said that they would support another candidate, and 0.7% were undecided. Again, this poll was conducted by Lansing-based Glenn Garriff Group. And this is not only the first time Kamala Harris has led Trump since becoming the Democratic nominee, but as the Detroit News says, it's the largest lead here in Michigan for either Biden when he was in the race or Harris has recorded against Trump. That is some good news, but guess what? Here's even better news, and this is something that really caught my eye. Harris has closed Trump's lead on who will be better at dealing with the economy from 14 points down to 7 points. So she has halved it. I'm sorry, it is still a flipping mystery that someone thinks that this guy who tanked the economy, that Biden and Harris saved, that somehow that clown is better with the economy, a con man who failed at everything that he ever touched. Also, according to this poll, 2 in 3 likely Michigan voters think that Donald Trump's 20% tariff plan will lead to higher prices, because it will lead to higher prices. And 7 in 10 voters are not seeing the massive crime wave Trump is talking about on the stump. Whoa. Okay, now, to me, that number stuck out more than who's leading the presidential race here in Michigan, because that's huge. I mean, considering how much dear leaders tried to paint a picture of America becoming a dystopia, which is strange considering that's kind of what it felt like when he was in office. But even though people aren't buying into the lies, let's be frank, everybody, he's still very close to winning Michigan and has a good chance at reclaiming the White House. And it's because of the Electoral College, which is like what I heard someone say this week is the DEI program for Republicans. That was a good one. Oh, man. Anyway, seriously, no one is questioning that Kamala Harris will win the popular vote. I'm not hearing anyone question that whatsoever, but it's going to come down to a couple of states to see who ultimately wins the Electoral College. That's not how it should be. That's why I'm calling on the Democratic majority in Michigan to pass State Representative Kerry Reinkantz's bill to have Michigan become part of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I mean, this will help Michigan join 17 other states in becoming a compact which says whichever presidential candidate wins the popular vote, that's who will win the state's Electoral College votes. That's democracy. That's being democratic. That is majority will. And if enough states join the compact to nullify the current Electoral College structure, then the voice of the people will truly, truly be heard. So win or lose in this election, Michigan Democrats, please pass that bill because it's up to all of us. Those of you listening here, it's up to all of us to press Michigan Democrats to pass it in Lansing before the end of the year. Or it's up to all of us to vote and increase the Democrats' advantage in the state house this year, and I'll have more to say on that in just a few moments. But I'd like to end this segment playing what I think was the highlight of the night in the U.S. Senate debate between Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin and former MAGA Republican Congressman Mike Rogers, Florida Mike Rogers, who are vying to win retiring Senator Debbie Stabenow's seat. Listen to this.
Of being unilaterally pro-life, of never breaking once with his party on this issue. Right? So it's not a talking point to women. It is our lives. It's whether we bleed to death in a parking lot. It's who and when gets to decide how we have a family. Do not trust him.
That was a tremendous line of attack against Florida Mike Rogers by Alyssa Slotkin. And it's frankly a line that is always a slam dunk against any MAGA Republican because they all want to take away a woman's freedom. They all want to take away a woman's healthcare choices. They all want to control a woman's economic choices. And Slotkin was great in that moment, reminding everyone that as we voted to enshrine abortion rights in our state's constitution, Florida Mike Rogers was nowhere to be seen because he was too busy making buco bucks while in Florida. I mean, that's where he lived. But while he was a congressman, Florida Mike did support a national abortion ban starting at 20 weeks. And in 2003, as a congressman, he co-sponsored legislation to withdraw federal approval of the abortion-inducing medication known as mifepristone. And also, Florida Mike voted 56 times to restrict or outright ban abortions throughout the country. 56 times. That's what Florida Mike Rogers did. Now, Rogers tried to paint Michigan as slipping into some kind of economic crash, but as I pointed out in last week's Friday Short, that's not really true considering that Michigan's unemployment rate is at a 20-year low. And as our good friends from Distill Social wrote about the debate, Slotkin came to the debate armed with an actual, I'll be darned, plan to increase manufacturing in the state, expanding tax cuts for middle-class families, and reducing healthcare and housing costs. I can't believe it. She actually showed up with a plan. Meanwhile, Florida Mike only complains about high prices at the stores, but you never hear any solutions that Florida Mike has in helping people, let alone going after those practicing in greedflation. Oh, and Slotkin reminded everyone that Florida Mike Rogers voted to raise the retirement age for Social Security, and as I talked about last week, Florida Mike is also against allowing Medicare to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices. Oh, that is great. Man of the people. He doesn't work for the pharmaceutical industry. He really cares about you. But even more than the debate, Florida Mike Rogers apparently still doesn't have a home here in Michigan officially. As the aforementioned John King from Michigan Advance reported last spring, since Florida Mike and his wife lived high in the hog in Florida, they needed residency. They needed it fast here in Michigan so he could run for the Senate seat. So they purchased a little itty-bitty home in White Lake Township, but had that little itty-bitty home demolished so they could rebuild it, ostensibly. In the meantime, they're living with family in Genoa Township, where he originally registered to vote. But the Detroit Free Press reports that Florida Mike suddenly switched his voter registration to the White Lake Township property. But as John King writes in Michigan Advance, the Detroit Free Press also reported that the home does not yet have a certificate of occupancy, which means he could not legally be living in the home, creating the possibility that he, Florida Mike Rogers, committed a misdemeanor by registering to vote in a home in which he did not actually reside. Wow! Is this yet another case of Republican voter fraud from the party of law and order, from the party of Ronald Reagan, who didn't even dare remove his coat in the Oval Office? Now, there is some irony in the story because, you see, Florida Mike Rogers, when he was a state senator back in the late 1990s, championed a bill that required the address on a voter's driver's license to be the same as the address on their voter registration. You see, this made it more difficult for college students to vote, especially when they were off at school. I remember this because I was in college at the time. And as Mr. King reminds us, and I'm quoting, when Rogers did run for the 8th district the next year, he ended up winning the seat by just 111 votes over Democratic State Senator Diane Byram. Rogers may have been helped by his own legislation as Michigan State University was within the 8th district. I'll be darned. That was just dumb luck. Florida Mike set up roadblocks to make it more difficult for young people to vote because young people tend to vote more progressive. And while refusing to propose policies that might actually attract young voters to the Republican side, Florida Mike passed bills designed to discourage young people from voting. Of course, with the passage of Prop 3 in 2018, students can now vote absentee ballot by mail because, you see, it's always progressives who want to invite democracy, while Republicans always wanted to vanquish democracy. So that's your choice here in Michigan. Voting for a party that believes in freedom to vote, freedom for a woman to choose what she wants to do with her body, and also the party that wants to create equal opportunity for many who cannot get it. Or you can vote for a party that does the exact opposite while working for its rich and out-of-touch donor base. Choose wisely.
A podcast that believes in using common sense to move Michigan into the future. And by common sense, we mean progressive sense. We've all seen what 40 years of Republican leadership did to this state, and we refuse to go back. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. You can follow Pat on Facebook or X. Pat still calls it Twitter. Or on the Gram, Threads, and also on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. All right, I think we gave Pat enough time to catch his breath. Let's get back to it. Here's Pat Johnston.
Hey, next week I'll speak with environmental activist and influential blogger and YouTuber, Michigan's very own Peter Sinclair. Obviously, with all of these severe hurricanes and climate change causing all kinds of severe weather events across the globe, I thought, you know what, it would be a pretty good idea to bring Peter on next week to talk about how climate change is affecting not just the state, but everywhere. And also, maybe we can talk about the steps that have been taken so far to start to fight back against climate change, or at least slow it down. But also, why have we been losing this fight, and what can we do to win it, both environmentally and also politically? So Peter Sinclair will be my guest next week. Oh, by the way, one of Project 2025's goals is defunding FEMA. Just thought you'd like to know. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. Executive Director of Blue Missouri, Jess Piper, recently tweeted the following, so let me read it here. Down ballot candidates running for a seat when they know they likely can't flip that seat are the real MVPs. They are knocking doors and talking to their neighbors, doing the work. They are turning out Democrats in rural red spaces, which will help races at the top of the ticket. Now, I have mentioned Miss Piper on the podcast before. She's a dirt road Democrat from Missouri, and she's doing all that she can to fight back against the MAGA Christian nationalist movement that's running rampant in her state. She's also the one who talked about the fundy baby voice that many Christian nationalist women utilize, like Alabama Senator Katie Britt. But I just wanted to share Jess Piper's post with you about those down ballot Dems who run for seats that they know they probably won't flip, but they are knocking on the doors and trying to have another message, or at least trying to push another message other than the extreme MAGA Christian nationalism presented to the voters in those districts. And I've spoken to a few Democrats here on the podcast who are running for Congress and running for state house seats in rural districts. Some have a pretty decent shot at making some real noise this year, while others most likely won't win, but they are not only making their presence heard, but they're maybe adding a few more people to the polls to vote the top of the ticket this year, at least for the Democrats. You see, if Democrats don't challenge MAGA in all of MAGA's so-called strongholds, then that'll only depress Democratic turnout for statewide and national races. As Ms. Piper said, these dirt road Democrats are helping races at the top of the ticket, but even more than that, they are beginning to build an infrastructure, a future, the blue wall, a foundation that others will benefit from for years to come. I mean, we saw that in Delta County, how regular people there just wanted to bring back sanity and competency to their local government, and they were able to defeat 3 MAGA extremists on the county commission in that UP county. It just didn't happen. The people up there had to organize, they had to message, and they had to reach out to voters and let them know how destructive and chaotic MAGA leadership really is. And they won. The foundation for a red district to turn blue doesn't just happen overnight. It takes some time, it takes some work, but it helps others who feel like that no one is listening to them actually realize, maybe for the first time, that someone is actually listening to them and someone actually is fighting for them. And that causes a win-win for the anti-MAGA forces. It brings out new voters to the poll who will help the top of the ticket for now while placing a cornerstone or a flag, if you shall, in the ground to let people know that progressive, common sense fighters are here to stay. So please, donate to those campaigns.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Left of Lansing. As I said, join us next week when I invite environmental activist Peter Sinclair on Michigan's Progressive Podcast. It should be an awesome discussion with Mr. Sinclair. Remember, you can always contact me, leftoflansing@gmail.com. Please subscribe and give a good 5-star review to the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to Left of Lansing on YouTube. And as of this recording, the Detroit Tigers are just 1 win away from reaching the American League Championship Series. Oh man, this is such a surreal feeling considering the unlikeliness of this run by our Tigers, which I think is what's making this so surreal and memorable for many, many fans out there. Oh, and I hope theathletic.com, which rated Comerica Park last when it comes to playoff atmosphere. Yeah, I hope it's eating some crow now after seeing how awesome the Comerica Park crowd was in Game 3. And as AJ Hinch said, somebody let these Tigers get hot. Get those absentee ballots in ASAP. It'll help your election clerks. Until next time, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.